A narcissist will sleep with anybody, not because they're passionate, not because they're in love, but because to them, sex is not intimacy. It's ammunition. If you've ever wondered why they move from person to person so easily, why loyalty means nothing, why connection feels fake, today you're going to understand the psychology behind it. If this is resonating with you, pause for a moment and reflect. How often did you confuse intensity with intimacy? Drop a comment or write it down for yourself. Awareness is how you break the cycle. Narcissistic supply is the psychological fuel that keeps a narcissistic personality functioning, and sexual conquests become one of the fastest and most potent ways to obtain it. At the core of narcissism lies a deeply unstable sense of self-worth. It may look like arrogance or supreme confidence on the outside, but internally there is fragility, insecurity, and a constant need for external reinforcement. Validation is not a pleasant bonus for them. It is a necessity. Without it, they feel restless, irritable, hollow, even panicked. Sex becomes a shortcut to that validation because it delivers immediate proof of desirability and power. When someone is willing to sleep with them, it signals admiration, attraction, and approval all at once. It confirms in their mind, I am wanted, I am superior, I can win. This is less about mutual pleasure and more about ego stabilization. The other person becomes evidence that they still have charm, evidence that they can compete, evidence that they matter. Each new partner resets their shaky self-esteem, at least temporarily. The problem is that this boost doesn't last. Because the underlying insecurity is never resolved, the validation fades quickly. What felt intoxicating one night becomes ordinary the next. The narcissistic individual may then seek another encounter, not necessarily because the previous partner was inadequate, but because the internal emptiness resurfaces. The pursuit itself can even be more thrilling than the act, since chasing someone provides anticipation, dominance, and the illusion of control. Over time, sexual behavior becomes less about connection and more about accumulation. Numbers, variety, novelty, these serve as trophies reinforcing their grandiose self-image. Intimacy, which requires vulnerability and emotional reciprocity, does not provide the same immediate ego reinforcement. In fact, true closeness can feel threatening because it exposes their insecurities. So they return to what works quickly: attention, seduction, conquest, and the brief surge of worth that follows, only to repeat the cycle when the high inevitably dissolves. Sex for a narcissistic personality is often less about pleasure and more about power. Power over perception, power over emotions, power over another human being. When sex becomes a tool for control, it shifts from intimacy into strategy. It becomes a way to dominate the emotional landscape of a relationship and to secure a superior position within it. At the heart of narcissism is a relentless need to feel in control. Control protects them from vulnerability. Control protects them from rejection. When someone desires them sexually, it creates leverage. They know attraction clouds judgment. They know physical chemistry can bond people quickly, and they use that knowledge. Sex can fast-track attachment in others, while for the narcissist, it may remain emotionally detached. This imbalance gives them the upper hand. Sex can also be used to reward and punish. When they want admiration or compliance, they may intensify affection and physical intimacy. When they feel criticized, slighted, or bored, they may withhold it. This creates confusion and anxiety in their partner, strengthening the narcissist's control. The partner begins chasing closeness, trying to earn the intimacy back. not realizing it is being strategically regulated. There is also the ego element. Being able to seduce someone reinforces a sense of dominance. It becomes proof of influence. If they can make someone want them, crave them, or compete for them, it confirms their perceived superiority. The act itself may matter less than the psychological victory behind it. In some cases, multiple partners amplify this sense of power. Triangulation, letting one partner know others exist, fuels jealousy and competition. That competition feeds their ego and solidifies their control over the emotional environment. It is not about deep connection, it is about orchestrating attention. True intimacy requires equality and mutual vulnerability. But equality can feel threatening to someone who depends on feeling superior. So sex becomes a controlled exchange rather than a shared experience. It becomes a mechanism to maintain dominance, regulate insecurity, and avoid the discomfort of genuine emotional exposure. Chronic emptiness and boredom sit quietly at the core of many narcissistic patterns, and they are far more powerful than most people realize. Beneath the charm, the confidence, and the constant pursuit of stimulation is a restless internal void. It's not just occasional loneliness, it's a persistent sense that something is missing, that nothing is ever quite enough. This emptiness can feel intolerable, like emotional flatness or agitation, and it drives impulsive behaviors designed to escape it. Sex becomes one of the quickest ways to interrupt that internal vacuum. It is intense, stimulating, and charged with novelty. In the early stages, the flirtation, the chase, the anticipation, there is excitement. Dopamine spikes, attention flows. The narcissistic individual feels alive, energized, significant. For a moment, the boredom disappears. The emptiness quiets down. But the key word is moment. Because chronic emptiness is not solved by external stimulation. Once the novelty fades, once the person becomes familiar, the emotional intensity drops. What once felt thrilling now feels ordinary. And ordinary can feel unbearable to someone who depends on external highs to feel stable. So they look for the next spark, the next new person, the next situation that promises intensity. Impulsivity plays a role here. When boredom hits, it can feel urgent. There is little tolerance for stillness or self-reflection because stillness exposes the void. Acting out sexually, pursuing someone new, or engaging in risky encounters becomes a distraction strategy. It fills time. It creates drama. It generates stories and reactions. It replaces emotional numbness with sensation. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. The brain associates new sexual attention with relief from emptiness. The person may not consciously think, I feel hollow, so I'll seek validation. Instead, they simply feel restless and act on it. The behavior becomes habitual. What gets lost in this cycle is depth. Stability feels dull. Consistency feels unstimulating. Healthy attachment requires patience and emotional presence, which do not produce the same immediate rush. So boredom becomes the enemy, and impulsive sexual behavior becomes the escape hatch, a temporary solution to a much deeper, unresolved void. Objectification sits at the center of this pattern. When someone struggles with narcissistic traits, other people are often experienced less as full human beings and more as extensions of their own needs. Instead of seeing a partner as a separate person with feelings, vulnerabilities, history, and depth, they see what that person provides: admiration, beauty, status, access, validation. The focus shifts from who are you to what do you give me? In sexual dynamics, this becomes especially pronounced. Sex is not approached as a mutual exchange of closeness and pleasure, but as a transaction. The other person becomes a vehicle for ego gratification. Their body becomes proof of desirability. Their attraction becomes confirmation of worth. Their attachment becomes evidence of influence. Emotional depth is secondary, sometimes irrelevant. Because of this objectification, detachment comes easily. If someone is primarily valued for what they provide, once that supply diminishes, so does the interest. There is little hesitation in moving on because the emotional bond was never deeply rooted in the first place. What may feel intimate and meaningful to the other person can feel interchangeable to the narcissistic individual. This also explains the rapid shifts that can occur. Intense pursuit can be followed by sudden coldness. It's not necessarily confusion on their part, it's functionality. When the conquest phase is active, the person is exciting, idealized, even pedestalized. Once familiarity sets in and the ego boost stabilizes, the sense of novelty fades. Without novelty or heightened validation, the internal reward decreases. Lack of emotional attachment does not always mean a total absence of feeling. There may be moments of affection or even longing, but those feelings are often filtered through self-reference. How does this person make me feel becomes more important than how does this person feel? Empathy may be limited, especially when their needs conflict with someone else's. True intimacy requires recognizing another person's autonomy and emotional reality. It requires mutual vulnerability and sustained care. When someone operates from an objectifying lens, closeness feels transactional rather than connective, and sex becomes an experience of consumption rather than communion. Entitlement is one of the most defining features driving this behavior. A narcissistic mindset often carries an unshakable belief that normal rules do not apply to them. Boundaries are seen not as reasonable limits, but as obstacles. If they want something, attention, admiration, sex, they feel justified in pursuing it, regardless of the impact on others. This sense of entitlement is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind charm, persuasion, or rationalization. But underneath it is a core belief: my needs matter more. In sexual situations, this can translate into a disregard for emotional agreements, commitments, or the feelings of a partner. If they are in a relationship, they may still seek others because they believe they deserve more excitement, more validation, more options. Fidelity can feel restrictive, not because they don't understand the concept, but because they resent limits placed on their desires. The idea of denying themselves attention or pleasure can feel like an injustice. Boundary violations often follow. They may push for intimacy quickly, testing how far they can go. If someone hesitates, they may use flattery, pressure, guilt, or subtle manipulation to override that hesitation. Consent may be technically present, but it can be influenced by emotional coercion. The narcissistic individual focuses on achieving their objective rather than ensuring mutual comfort and safety. There is also an assumption of accessibility. They may interpret friendliness as sexual interest or believe that attraction automatically grants them rights to someone's body or time. Rejection can trigger anger or contempt because it challenges their inflated self-image. Instead of accepting no as a normal boundary, they may perceive it as an insult. This entitlement fuels impulsive sexual behavior because there is little internal brake system. Healthy restraint requires empathy and respect for limits, both internal and external. When someone believes they are owed admiration and gratification, self-control weakens. The pursuit becomes justified in their mind. They are not betraying. They are claiming what they believe they deserve. And that belief can override loyalty, integrity, and emotional responsibility with startling ease. At first glance, promiscuity in a narcissistic personality can look like confidence or endless appetite, but underneath that pattern is often a powerful, unspoken fear of abandonment. The irony is striking. The very behavior that pushes people away is frequently driven by terror of being left. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, abandonment is not just painful, it is annihilating. Because their sense of self is so dependent on external validation, losing a partner can feel like losing stability, worth, even identity. If one person leaves, it threatens the fragile belief that they are desirable and superior. Rather than risk being emotionally exposed to that possibility, they often create backup systems. Multiple sexual partners can function as insurance policies. If one relationship falters, another source of validation is already in place. This reduces vulnerability. It prevents them from ever being fully dependent on one person. Emotional exclusivity feels dangerous because it concentrates risk. Diversifying attention spreads that risk out. There is also a preemptive quality to the behavior. On some level, they may expect abandonment. They may assume that eventually someone will see through them, criticize them, or withdraw. Instead of waiting to be left, they emotionally detach first. Sleeping with others can become a way of staying one step ahead, proving to themselves that they have options, that they are not the one who will be discarded. Yet this strategy never truly resolves the fear. It only masks it. Each new partner provides temporary reassurance. I'm still wanted. But because the underlying insecurity remains untouched, the anxiety resurfaces. If one person becomes distant, panic can spike. The response may be to seek even more attention, escalating the cycle. This creates a paradox. They crave admiration and attachment, but they sabotage deep security. They want to be desired, but they avoid the vulnerability required for lasting intimacy. The sexual behavior becomes armor, a shield against the possibility of being left, even as it quietly guarantees emotional instability and reinforces the very fear they are trying to outrun. Shame is a powerful but often hidden driver in narcissistic behavior, especially when it comes to sexual patterns. While narcissism is commonly associated with grandiosity and arrogance, underneath that inflated exterior, there is frequently a deep reservoir of shame. Not healthy guilt that leads to accountability, but toxic shame, the feeling of being fundamentally flawed, inadequate, or unworthy. This shame is rarely acknowledged consciously. Instead, it is defended against at all costs. After impulsive sexual encounters, particularly ones that are risky, dishonest, or emotionally empty, there can be a brief crash. The high fades. The validation wears off. In that quiet aftermath, shame can surface. They may feel exposed, out of control, or momentarily aware of the emptiness behind the behavior. But sitting with that awareness is intolerable because it threatens the grandiose self-image they work so hard to maintain. Rather than process the shame, they defend against it. Common defenses include rationalization, everyone does this, minimization, it's not a big deal, projection, my partner drove me to it, or outright denial. Admitting wrongdoing would require confronting vulnerability and imperfection, which clashes with their self-concept. So the shame is pushed down or redirected outward. Here's where the cycle intensifies. Because the shame is never resolved, it lingers beneath the surface, creating discomfort. That discomfort can trigger the very behavior that caused it. Seeking another sexual conquest becomes a way to override the shame with fresh validation. A new admirer temporarily restores the grandiose narrative: I'm desirable, I'm powerful, I have options. The ego inflates again, and the previous discomfort is drowned out. But the relief is temporary. Each repetition strengthens the pattern: impulse, high, crash, shame, defense, repeat. Over time, this cycle can become automatic. The person may not consciously connect their behavior to shame at all. They simply feel restless or irritable and act out again. What looks like carefree promiscuity from the outside can actually be a fragile attempt to escape internal self-loathing. The tragedy is that every repetition deepens the divide between their inflated persona and their unaddressed vulnerability, making genuine self-reflection increasingly difficult and the cycle harder to break. One of the most important distinctions to understand is the difference between intimacy and ego gratification. They can look similar on the surface: passion, attention, physical closeness, intense chemistry, but psychologically, they are worlds apart. Intimacy is about mutual connection. Ego gratification is about self enhancement. And for someone operating from a narcissistic framework, those two often get confused or completely substituted for one another. Intimacy requires vulnerability. It asks a person to be seen, not just admired, but known. That means exposing insecurities, fears, imperfections, and emotional needs. It involves reciprocity, empathy, and the willingness to prioritize another person's experience alongside your own. Intimacy deepens over time through consistency, trust, and emotional safety. It is steady rather than dramatic. Ego gratification, on the other hand, is immediate and self focused. The goal is not to connect, but to feel elevated. Sexual attention becomes a mirror reflecting back desirability, power, and worth. The other person's inner world becomes secondary to the boost they provide. The excitement of being wanted, pursued, or admired replaces the slower, more demanding work of building emotional closeness. For a narcissistic individual, ego gratification can feel safer than intimacy. Intimacy carries risk: the risk of rejection, criticism, or exposure. If someone truly knows you, they might see your flaws. They might leave. Ego gratification avoids that depth. It allows for intensity without transparency. It delivers validation without requiring sustained vulnerability. This is why sexual experiences can feel passionate but hollow. There may be chemistry, seduction, and intensity, but not true emotional presence. Once the ego boost is secured, interest can fade because the primary objective has been achieved. The connection was never the goal, the affirmation was. Over time, this substitution creates a pattern where excitement is mistaken for closeness, drama is mistaken for depth, conquest is mistaken for love. But ego gratification inflates temporarily, while intimacy nourishes and stabilizes. Without the capacity for genuine emotional reciprocity, sexual encounters remain surface level reinforcements of identity rather than meaningful bonds between two fully seen and valued individuals.